Great. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Openscapes' second community call. Openscapes is an initiative to help researchers do better science in less time together. So through our Champions Mentorship Program, we help research teams develop habits for data-intensive science that's more open, reproducible, collaborative, inclusive, and kind. I'm Julia Lowndes. I'm a marine ecologist and co-director of Openscapes at the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis at the University of California, Santa Barbara in the US. And I'm grateful for the land on which I am, and I want to honor the Chumash people for continuing to care for these lands. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today on Thursday in this community call. And we wanted to remind you that all of our events abide by our code of conduct to support a safe, inclusive, welcoming, and harassment-free experience for everyone in our community. So I'll pass it over to Erin now.
Hi, I am also grateful that you all are here. This is Julie and Openscapes' second community call, and it's always one of those things like, is anybody going to show up? And it's really wonderful to see this list of names. So thank you all for coming. So I have been part of Openscapes for the last several months, unofficially since June and officially since November as the co-director. And I am based in Boulder, Colorado, and run a consulting company called Metadata Game Changers. And so Openscapes has been around since 2018. But since Julie and I have been working together, we realized that we had this opportunity to think about how we were in really a formative phase for Openscapes. And actually, I think having this call today on the anniversary of George Floyd's death is really where I started to really have my own kind of internal reckoning. And I think that that's informed a lot of the ways that we've worked together over the last year. And that came to kind of a fruitful, productive head when we applied for the CS&S funding, event funding, to run our first open call for a Science Champions program. And that's actually going on right now. And part of that was that we would be able to work with and have support, financial support, to work with a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert. And that's how we had the really good fortune to cross paths with Tara Robertson and learn from her as a thought partner. And what's been cool is we've been in this phase of pretty rapid iteration and growth. And so what we've been learning about and talking about with Tara, we've been able to incorporate into our NOAA cohort, which just wrapped at the end of April, and then apply to these two cohorts that are running right now. So with that introduction of me and where we are, I'd like to introduce Tara Robertson, who runs her own consulting company. And Tara, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, I'm Tara Robertson. I'm in Vancouver, Canada, on the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I ran diversity and inclusion at Mozilla, a mission-driven tech company, for 3 years. Last fall in September, I quit my job and took a break. I thought it was just going to be a month, but it turns out I was actually quite burnt out, and I took the whole fall off. Beginning of this year, I started a consulting company. I wanted to work with engineering and tech folks around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Julie and Erin sent me an email. And at first I was like, I'm not really sure what Openscapes is. And we had a call and I was like, I'm still not entirely sure what Openscapes is. And these two are amazing and I really want to work with them. So this is my first consulting engagement, and I feel really fortunate that Openscapes hired me. Initially, we're trying to think about like what the deliverables were going to be, and they shifted a little in the engagement. And it was just such an awesome pleasure to work with and learn from and learn together with Julie and Erin. I really love what Openscapes is doing and what the Champions program is doing, especially around engaging, empowering, and amplifying. Yeah, so we're going to get into some of the stuff that we've learned together and make some of our process visible, but I'll hand it over to Julie to explain the agenda.
Great. Well, so our plan for today is that for the next half an hour or so, we're going to have a conversation between Tara, Erin, and I to reflect on our work together and what we've learned. And so we have a few prompts to sort of structure the conversation, but most of our meetings were really freeform with some specific agenda items, and then a lot of just idea generation and processing together. So we thought that this call we would continue with that process. So we'll talk for the next half an hour, 35 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for a broader discussion with everyone. And we'd love to hear your questions, your ideas, your thoughts. But then also throughout the whole time in the chat, please feel free to write into the chat as well. And that is a good segue into our first prompt that we're going to put into the chat, which is an icebreaker question. And I'll have Tara explain a little bit about how we started to do this in our own calls together.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, this is my first gig as a consultant, and I was really nervous working with such esteemed leaders and scientists, and like I had a bit of imposter syndrome. So the first meeting I came into was super all business, and what I think is really necessary to do DEI work well is building trust and building relationships. So it didn't feel quite good to just be all business and no connection. So the second meeting, I just said, can we do like an icebreaker question with each other? Because I want to get to know who you are as people and learn about like what makes you tick and what you're passionate about beyond the work that we're going to do together. So our icebreaker question today, which I'll ask Julie and Erin to answer it out loud, and I'll ask you all to answer it in the chat, is what's something that you've learned during the pandemic? Julie, Erin, who wants to take it first? I'm going to go last.
I think I've learned this during the pandemic, but especially working with you, Tara, is to be braver and to bring kind of the ideas from open science of being imperfect and sharing imperfect work, but bringing that to kind of a braveness space, especially around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And I learned how to make ice cream and snowshoe. I was thinking about this, and one of the things that my husband did that I didn't realize I needed or appreciated was that he was breaking up this 14-month chunk of time that like the days ran together with new things. And so we were on a pretty significant ice cream kick, and our favorite flavor is coffee bourbon ice cream. And then another thing that we did about this time last year, we were living up in the mountains, and he ordered snowshoes for us, and we got outside in a new way. And it was these sort of cool things that I never would have done if it wasn't for slowing down or not traveling. So Tara, what did you learn during the pandemic?
Similar, like, well, not about making ice cream, but the thing you said right at the tail end about slowing down. When I left my job and just took a break, I realized that I'd just been going so quickly. I was traveling at least once a month. My work days were getting longer and longer. I was one of those people who during COVID, like, well, I can't do the things I would do before and after work, so I'm just going to work longer. And that really wasn't good for me. So one of the things I've been thinking about really intentionally this year is how I spend my time. And like, I think time is the most precious resource we all have, and being really intentional about saying yes to things and saying no to other things. And when I say yes, like fully being there and like bringing my whole messy self. So that's it for me. I'm loving reading what I'm seeing in the chat. Cross-country
Yeah.
skiing, running outdoors.
Virtual events. I learned a lot about virtual events too. I know a lot about Zoom. Appreciating what I have.
How to teach kindergarten. Wow.
Yeah. An appreciation for school teachers.
Yes.
We were teacher fans over here before, but a whole new level of appreciation for teachers.
Thanks so much for sharing those, and thanks, Erin and Julie. Yeah, it's nice to get to know people and get to know some of the stuff that is just beyond the strict agenda. Thanks.
Yeah. Do you want to share any of the other icebreaker prompts that we went through together? Just, I was reflecting that you had once asked us to share an item and tell us a story about an item in our house. And then what were some of the other ones?
Something my mentor asked me, like what was a highlight and a low light of your week?
And one other,
Those are the two that stick out. Oh, Julie, go ahead.
It just fell back to my head though. You asked us to share something that we bring to our work that you wouldn't know about us necessarily. So that was neat. Okay, well, so the first prompt that we have in our discussion here is for each of us to quickly share the two biggest things that we learned and are taking forward from our work together. So Tara, would you start with your two biggest things?
So I've got two. I think my first, I mentioned it already. For me, there's been an unpacking of the next layer of imposter syndrome. Like before our first meeting, I read Julie and Erin's bio. It's like, oh gosh, like, why would these amazing people want to work with me? And I shared that, and Erin said something that was just so lovely. Like, she didn't diminish her accomplishments or who she was, but she's like, we think you're equally amazing. Like, pull a seat up to the table. And that was really powerful. And I think the strength of diverse teams, like when I'm working with businesses around the business case around diversity, equity, and inclusion, like there's lots of research out there around how diverse teams are more innovative, perform better, and are more innovative. I said that twice. And like our backgrounds and our areas of expertise are really different between the three of us. And it was one of those amazing experiences where, yeah, like it just kind of felt like a transformer where we felt like more than the sum of our parts. And I love working on teams like that. What about you, Erin?
So I think one of the things I loved was I was really nervous to start working with you. I felt like I'd sort of been just kind of like pushing aside, I knew that diversity, equity, and inclusion were important. They were things that I espoused as my values, but I had never done any intentional work on to move a program forward that I cared about. And what I really love is that you started with us where we were, and that there was no question that was too embarrassing to ask. And there was no shame that I felt at all in working together in this group with the three of us. But one of the things that in our first conversation, we were trying to explain what Openscapes was and what Open Science was. And Tara just asked this simple question of, well, who's safe to participate in open science? And I think that was one of the things that was illuminating to me of blind spots that I had that I wasn't aware of. That really people who are able to participate in open science are people who are able to, who don't need all of the kind of normal academic validation, publishing, tenure track, sorts of things. And so there's an element of risk that our pool might be smaller than we thought it was because we weren't aware of who was being left out. So I think that's one thing that I'm taking away. And then the other is, Julie mentioned this at the beginning, but being braver in how we talk about what we do and how we talk about doing kinder science. And so Tara also mentioned that like we had these sort of, we have big ambitions of disrupting how science is done, and really changing how people work together in open science, and that we weren't going to do that all at once. But one of the small steps that we've taken is Julie and I are both more confident talking about kinder science. So it doesn't have to be all nice. I think we're also learning that kind isn't just nice, but that we can do this in a compassionate way. And it's been really exciting to see how people respond to that language. So Julie, what are your 2 takeaways?
When we were discussing this, it's really hard to only have 2, and I've like been shifting like what my 2 might be. But I think one of the biggest things for me was thinking about designing for inclusion and designing with empathy. So in our first conversations, one of the first things Tara introduced to us was the work of Dori Tunstall, who does a lot of work around respectful design. And something she talked about in her YouTube video, or one of her conversations that's on YouTube, and I think Tara will put this into the chat, is how you start with values and you translate those values through design into experiences. And so thinking about that, when we were first discussing the Openscapes Champions program, and we talked about how teams participate in this process for learning about open science and data science, Tara said, oh, that sounds more inclusive because you're not participating alone, it's less lonely. And I'd like never thought about inclusion in that way, and sort of being able to have that kind of language and thought process around design and around how to think and talk about it has been really transformative for me. So the design part of it was one of my takeaways. And then the second was around psychological safety. And so this is the idea by Amy Edmondson that it's a shared belief held by members of a team that it is safe to participate in this team and take interpersonal risks with this team. And so that's something that's, been really important to my work with the Ocean Health Index and our work with Openscapes, and but not having the language around it and knowing the research behind it. So Tara, again, like introduced this concept and the research behind it and helped us kind of unpack that, and then also build that into the curriculum of the Champions program so that we can pass it forward.
And one thing I would just add on to the psychological safety was just that we also practiced it. And so, what you're watching us do today is also sort of feels sort of like an advanced class with Tara on the fact that we practiced this with all of these conversations we had with her, that we really understood it at an emotional level.
I just it's not, you've given me a lot of credit, which is very generous. And I think the notion that we built this together on a team, we made it safe to say, I don't know, or initially from the beginning, I don't know, you've just explained Openscapes, I still don't understand it. There's also a real generous sharing of we've got some different skills. And from little things to sharing keyboard shortcuts to bigger things, being this is going on and I don't know how to approach it. It's kind of been a brain trust as well, where with very little ego, we can approach hard things together with real high degree of trust. And I think the little things like the icebreakers, but also every time one of us was vulnerable with each other or said, I don't know, and had the others help us get there. I think that small layer over layer, that's the foundation we built together.
Yeah. Tara, would you also, the saying that I don't know is one of them. Would you remind us what there are a couple of just key things around psychological safety for people who may not be familiar with that term?
Yeah, it's Julie defined it, but Amy Edmondson defines it as the ability to speak up, either with a wild idea, wildly creative idea that's out of the box, or to speak up about something that you see that's not good, and to do that without the fear that there's going to be some retribution against you in the group. And both things are really important. Like, if you see that something's going to crash the servers or wreck production, like, and you don't speak up, then like there's a huge problem. But if you do speak up, and the first thing your manager or your lab manager or whomever, the person with power over you, is like, if they get angry or say like, well, why didn't you fix that? It doesn't make it safe to speak up again. Like, you might have raised the red flag that one time and you'll probably never do it again. Like, so the way that we respond to each other when that happens, like I had a manager who told me like, thank you for bringing this problem to me. I didn't have line of sight on this. Ooh, it's a big problem. And his body language told me like I wasn't in trouble. Me bringing this big problem to him was actually very welcome, and that it was safe to do so. So like on both the wildly positive and like the avoiding the negative things, it's super important.
Thanks. And I think we've seen it in applying it to open science and open data, that there are a lot of times when people don't want to appear, and in, I guess, in academic settings, maybe more broadly, but they don't want to appear dumb, or they don't want to appear like they're the only one in the room who doesn't know how to use a GitHub issue, or even what GitHub is. And so creating, for us, including that in Openscapes has been really important to help, to intentionally try to do that so that people feel like wherever they are, we can meet them there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Should I move to the next section?
Yeah, please.
So we also wanted to just kind of do a bit of a deeper reflection on the work that we've been doing. Those are some of like the key learnings we've had. Should I go first for this section? I'm going to ask myself the question and answer it. So, Tara, can you share some of your deeper reflections of our work together? Sure, Tara. So when in our first meeting, when we were trying to decide like what the engagement would look like, I asked a bunch of questions. Like I had my assumptions about the makeup of earth sciences and like what that might look like in terms of gender and race. Like I thought there'd be a fair number of women, but my assumption was that it probably wasn't racially diverse, like that there weren't a lot of people of color in the field. And then we're like talking about how we can, and Julie and Aaron told me that those assumptions were correct. And then we're talking about like, I think everyone, especially like, is thinking about race and racism in the workplace and in the work that we do more than we've ever done before, which is amazing. And I didn't think we would do that in my lifetime. But everyone wants more people of color, especially Black and Indigenous folks involved in their projects, their companies. I was like, well, that's great. And what does that do for the work? How does it shift how we do like biology and ask these questions? Like, and then in our first meeting, the question about like, what does decolonizing science even look like? And the three of us aren't the right people to answer that necessarily, but it's like, how do we get the people in the room who might have an answer to that question? And like, what would that look like? And I can't remember who recommended Braiding Sweetgrass, an amazing book by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And I think I'm not quite done it. I'm almost at the end of the audiobook, but it's been a really amazing way to shift how I think about what science is and how it's done and how it's measured. It's a really powerful book. And Erin and Julie, have you finished it?
I'm also not
still going.
Yeah, I'm not quite done yet either. I am sorry, I won't interject. I won't interject commentary.
Go ahead.
Okay. This was something that was really fun with Tara and Erin as we were working together, as we sort of created an informal book club around Braiding Sweetgrass. I think one of us mentioned it in a call, and then the other two got it, and we just started either on Slack or email or Twitter, just being like, I read this chapter and this spoke to me, or like this, we talk about it in our next meetings. And something, for those of you who haven't read the book, it's written by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's faculty, she's a botanist, I believe in New York. And she's an Indigenous woman who's also a scientist. And each chapter is a vignette weaving together her experiences and stories around her culture and around science culture and around her learning. And it is some of the most beautiful writing I have ever read. You learn so much about the environment and plants and traditional ways of thinking and doing and knowing. But also there's a lot of pain in there, as she was interested in plants and everything she learned throughout her life, and went to be a scientist to study that, and was told that her traditional ways of knowing was not science. And so like she's having to like adapt and come back to it. So there's a lot of, it's beautiful. Anyway, we've all been reading it.
The other book,
We've
I
also
wanted
got-
to grab it. All We Can Save is the other one that you recommended. Go ahead, Erin.
I was just gonna, somebody, Kate, received a copy of Braiding Sweetgrass for Mother's Day, and Jessica Couture also was saying she hadn't finished it, but is in it. But yeah, All We Can Save is also, was my favorite book and my least favorite, one of the hardest things I read. It wasn't not my least favorite, but I just got into the feeling section and got stuck. But we love it.
So like at least Braiding Sweetgrass has been an interesting touch point. Like I'm not a biologist, I'm not a scientist. So it's been an interesting way to think about, like for me as a DEI practitioner, like what does it mean to center different ways of knowing and being? And what does it mean when there's different people involved in what we're doing? Like, I think the process and the outcome look a lot different. Also, if I can't read fiction, that's one of the things that really the pandemic has impacted. I have a really hard time reading. So I've been listening to the audiobook. And I've been starting a lot of my days with coffee, my dog, the quiet morning, and this audiobook. So highly recommend it. And then the last thing I wanted to say was like the Trailhead illustration. Allison Horst has done these amazing, beautiful illustrations with Openscapes. And as an accessibility best practice, I was writing an alt text description. So for people who are visually impaired or blind, who came across the illustration on the website, like what would they see? And initially, I like the way I described it was like what was in the foreground, the different animals, and some of the animals I didn't know. So I was like, what's that guy with the bushy tail and the weird like binoculars? And then describing the midground and the background. But then realizing that the way the curriculum for the Champions program was the way that you talked about finding your own trailhead and noticing that the animals were in different groups, like I was like, oh, there's a lot going on in this illustration that I'm starting to see the layers. Can I ask you, like one of you, to tell me what you see in that?
Erin, do you want to start?
No.
Okay.
I put you both on the spot.
No, it's great. Erin put a link to this illustration in the chat, and I'm looking at it on this other screen. I absolutely love this illustration, and working with Allison Horst to create it has been really fun and iterative as we've learned more and put this together. But what we see, the idea of it is that, data intensive science can be this kind of sad and lonely experience, which is what represented by the animals in the bottom left, these kind of sad or isolated individuals, but that there's this whole landscape of open data science that's just beyond view potentially to them, and a way to engage in that landscape is through the power of welcome and having other people there to welcome you and provide a trail map and help you discover new paths or build new paths as you're going along your open data science journey. And so with it, then the further detail, there's beautiful bits of data throughout the landscape and little details that Allison's designed in here, but also like to represent the Champions program itself, folks participate as teams and go through on their paths together and intersect paths with other teams. That's a start of what I see, Erin.
Yeah. And so their teams are represented by their little bandanas, or their same colored hats. But I think one of the things that I've taken away, or this sort of deeper dive, since we've been working with Tara, when we've been showing this picture to a lot of people and a lot of different teams. And so Julie mentioned that we've had a lot of iterations on it. And one of the most recent iterations has actually been the animals with the little purple hats that have like a very tiny Openscapes logo that you might not even be able to recognize as an Openscapes logo. But we were having a conversation with one of the cohort teams and we were showing them this picture, and I just got this sense of like, something's not right. And so I brought it up with Julie, and I think it was in a conversation with Allison that what we realized was that we had originally drawn the animals with these purple hats as rangers, and there was this kind of hierarchical authoritative figure implication in the picture, which is pretty minor, but in some ways we wouldn't, like, it was just, we surfaced it, we took the hats off, then they looked naked, and then then Allison had the idea to put these purple hats on them so that anybody can be a science champion, an open science champion, and we're taking that layer of the sort of authoritative figure out of this landscape picture that we really love. So I think that's been the takeaway of all of that for me was being aware of those inklings and not just sweeping them under the rug or rushing through the rest of my day.
Mm-hmm. And I think that too, that process was really, it also like clarified, like creating this art also clarifies so much for us. And so, we were calling this the Rangers illustration. And then once we took off the Ranger hats, we were like, what is this illustration? Like, what are we defining? And we were like, this is the Champions illustration. This is the Champions program. Like, that was the original intent. Like, we kind of got off track, but that's what this is. And so it feels really good. And we have just updated the Champions page website with this illustration that we feel really great about.
I just love this. Like, I think it's a really creative way to communicate like what the intent and the content of the program is. And like, again, not a scientist, but I suspect that this is not like a normal or typical way to communicate. Julie, I'm curious, like what are some of the things that you want to reflect on about the last couple months?
Yeah, I think when I reflect on our work together, I think one of the big things is that we Openscapes is about behavior change and about helping develop new habits around open science and new practices, new tooling. And that's really hard to, and in the Champions program, we actually have folks create a pathways document where they describe their trailhead and then where they're going from there. Because it's really hard to have concrete deliverables in the Champions program as folks are having behavior change and creating new habits. But then when we were working with you, we sort of we weren't thinking about working with you as behavior change for ourselves. And so we were immediately thinking about deliverables and thinking about like how to like what deliverables we would work on with you. And I think a big part of our learning, you know, Erin and I have talked about this quite a bit. A big part of our learning has been that it's, you know, it's not about deliverables necessarily. It's about increasing diversity, equity, inclusion in all of your practices and in all of your habits and in your mindset and in your language and all of these things that are harder to, you know, have as a deliverable. So I think, you know, we were just talking before this call started that this is a really fun way to reflect together, and like that this call, in a way, one of the reasons why we wanted to make it public is that this is kind of a deliverable in itself, if we want to like get meta on that. Yeah, so I think, you know, not having deliverables is a bit weird to all of us. You know, you are very data driven. We're all very data driven, but especially in your consulting work. But really thinking and getting comfortable with the idea that this is about behavior change, not only for the two of us, but to pass on in, you know, in our spheres. Yeah. What about you, Erin? What have you been reflecting on?
Yeah, so I think in that meta, you were just saying about like realizing the difference between that, we came into this thinking it was deliverables. And I guess I also had this naive sort of idea that like there'd just be like some things we could do. And actually I did one of them just now, I'd forgotten to do, which was turn on the live transcript and the closed captioning. But that's one of the things with Tara, we talked about it, and then, you know, Julie and I just took the time to figure out how to do it in Zoom and tested some services and went on with it. And so that's a thing that we've added that was pretty simple and easy when we remember to do it. But we're still learning. And I think so sort of following on that meta idea from Julie of, you know, we were trying to change our own behavior. I actually think that Tara, you are a mentor for us in this, just like we are mentors for teams that are transitioning to open science. And when I think about it that way, I think, well, I just think it's just really cool. And one of the things that we talked about was having a plan. And so recently, like we just had something come up in a cohort call, wasn't catastrophic, but we handled it in the moment. And then afterwards, Tara and Julie and I had the chance to debrief on it and talk about it and talk about how we would have liked to handle it differently moving forward. And one of those things that we came up with was we really wanted to slow down and to use the line, something just happened here. And then to intentionally turn to whoever was affected and ask what they needed. And it's just that pause that would give us a chance to take a beat, to try a different path, and to support people who were affected. And so anyway, so that's, I think, a very cool thing that we've learned. The other thing that I know that Tara has, we've worked with Tara, and so we've found these areas that we want to learn. And one of those was around land acknowledgements. And so you saw Julie and Tara both offer land acknowledgements at the beginning. Another was around bystander training and how to speak up or how to react. And the thing that comes up in bystander training is that people are much, much more likely to react or to support or to speak up if they've thought about a plan. And so I think that's really one of the sort of powerful things working with Tara has been that we've been reflecting on how we want to change our behavior. And then we've been seeing it and we've been celebrating it in these calls with her of like, look what I did, or look how we changed. And having that place to celebrate too has been, I think, really helpful to keep us going as we move forward with Openscapes.
I'll mention too that we both went to a interactive workshop about territory acknowledgements led by Tatalia Nahani, and it was at the recommendation of Tara after we were talking about how we would like to incorporate land acknowledgements into our work, but didn't quite know how to go about that, and wanted to practice and just wanted to feel more informed and more comfortable. And this, but also realizing that should not be comfortable, and that's fine. That's also been a big part of this learning. So I think, from that workshop, we've been trying to become braver about having land acknowledgements at the beginning of our work, but also something that I really took away from Tatalia's workshop was how inclusion and open science are so interwoven, and something that she brought forth. This workshop was not about open science at all, but she was talking about imperfection and being imperfect and putting yourself imperfectly out there, which is so much about open science as well. But what she was talking about is how perfection is a colonial conditioning, and how if you're worried about getting something wrong and that holds you back from saying something, that is erasing. And that is something I had never thought about before. And she was, another one of I've just read in my notes here, another one of the things that she said was, trying to be perfect, you're really upholding white supremacy and colonialism, and how, that interplays with our lives and also with science and open science. So I feel like these conversations with Tara have been so rich because we are able to unpack and learn and discuss things and work through things, but also immediately have these really actionable learning experiences that then we can continue to wrestle with and try to amplify and move on, incorporate into our work more. Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly add, like, in the incident Erin mentioned in one of the workshops, I was the one who said the stupid thing, and I had no malice behind it, but it was just blah blah blah, oh blah, blah, blah. And then it was like, in the moment I was like, oh, like that was like, oh, you were riffing and you kind of, oh, I'm not sure how that landed. And then it's like, but there's 40 people here and we've got time and there's content we need to cover. And these are serious scientists is also the voice in my head. But after checking in with Erin and Julie being like, I didn't feel good about that. Like, how are you feeling? It's like, that wasn't quite right. And then even like a week after, it's like, still doesn't feel right. And being like, I need to reach out to someone and apologize, and being able to share that and have thought partners and like draft my apology in a Google Doc and get feedback from people on that, like that's slowing it down, that making it vulnerable, like getting another perspective on things. And Erin gave me some really great coaching about like, I think this is like more about what you're feeling and not what the other person's feeling. Like, I just think like if we could slow down in a lot of our work when things don't quite feel right, and have the vulnerability to share that with people, and then be able to get some feedback on what that repair looks like I think our workplaces, but also our world might look a little different. So the partnership with Julie and Erin on that has been amazing. Like, I just don't want you to think that I'm this all-seeing, all-knowing DEI expert. Like, I screw up a lot. Like, and you
not naughty because you screw up a lot.
But you made it safe to be like, ugh, that didn't feel good. Like, this is what I think I want to do to fix it. Like, would you mind looking at my apology before I send it? And getting great feedback, which honed the thing, and the person was fine and okay. So that's the most important thing. But the process again was really good for me. I know we're going into time where we want to have questions, so I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, I can't believe we're already just 15 minutes left of the call. So we'd love to open it up for questions, please go ahead and unmute or raise your hand or write in the chat. And what's on your mind? What's resonated with you, or what questions do you have?
Samantha.
Hey everyone, thank you for that. That was awesome. Hey Julie. Actually, before I start, I also have my copy of Braiding Sweetgrass. It's an awesome book. I'm only halfway through it, so it's like the first book I read where I actually have gone through and like underlined things, and I'm like, I can come back and reflect on this later because it's such a powerful like statement. So I'm glad you guys brought that up. But one of my questions was, you mentioned at the start how being open with our data is just an inherently risky thing for a lot of people, early career scientists, but also minoritized groups. And so do you see a path forward for making that less risky and more of like, it's a huge cultural shift that has to happen within the scientific community in general, but it's hard for me to see like what exact steps we need to take to make that a safer thing for more people to participate in. That might be a heavy, big question, but I am curious what your thoughts are.
So I have a couple of thoughts on that one. I mean, you mentioned culture change. So Julie and I have both been doing some work with the National Academy of Science on their roundtable on aligning incentives for open science. And so I think for it to become safer or less risky to share data, I think we need to have academic incentives that also align with our values. And I think it gets back to what Julie was saying about thinking about how our activities align with our values. But, you know, tenure awards from societies, publishing, all of those sort of those big three, funding is the fourth. Those things have to have incentives that are aligned with open data and sharing and open science practices. And, you know, we're starting to see some shifts there, but I think it's going to take more peer pressure and at many levels. So what Julie and I do with Openscapes is kind of bottom up. But, you know, we're really encouraged that a lot of university presidents are thinking about this too and how to change things at that level.
Mm-hmm. I would just add, you know, part of, you know, us kind of becoming braver and feeling more confident to speak up or challenge or just question at things. And in one of our cohort calls, when we were talking about open science, a more senior person said that it's safe for them to participate in open science, but they don't expect their students to because it's not, you know, because the incentives are not safe. And so we were able to kind of continue that conversation a bit and say, like, why is that? What changed? When did it become safe for you? What could you do to make it safer for others? Like, you know, if that person is talking about this didn't happen, but just to riff off that idea, like if somebody was if somebody is saying that it's not part of promotion, if open science isn't part of promotion, it's like, well, if you're on the promotion committee, like, could you do something to change? Like, what can we all do to play our part in changing this culture?
One more thing.
Yeah.
One other thing that Julie and I have been championing is around paying people. So a lot of times what we see is that open science and open data work is volunteer work, that data management work is not valued. And so making sure that we, where we can, are paying people to do this work is another place where that's a small thing that we can do to try to affect that change too.
Thanks, Sam. I see Raquel.
Yes, hello. I just wanted to start by saying thank you for creating this space, which is very inclusive and very safe to be vulnerable. And I think in the beginning of the conversation, one thing that popped out that we discussed was the imposter syndrome. And I just wanted to ask, from your personal experience, what is if you can pick out one thing that helped you go over that that barrier, what would that be?
I have an idea. I've felt imposter syndrome a lot in my life as a scientist, and when I joined open science communities, so when I started to learn R, the programming language R, through the sort of open source programming community, I felt less imposter syndrome there than, you know, you would think that going into a whole new field, you'd feel more imposter syndrome, but I actually felt less because there was the idea that everybody was coming from a different background and that everybody had different experiences and different expertise and had something valuable to contribute. And that made me feel much less of an imposter. And I was then able to bring that back to my, well, I'm still working on it, but like bring that back to my life as a scientist, feeling like we all have different experiences. We all, you know, like we all deserve to be here. Yeah.
Amazing.
Erin
Thank
or
you.
Tara? Yeah.
I've just been scraping in the background to grab this link, which I'm going to drop in the chat. I know I talked about imposter syndrome. I'm kind of reframing this in my head. There's this great article in Harvard Business Review by Ruchika and Jodi Ambiri. I forget Ruchika's last name. They're saying, stop telling women they've got imposter syndrome. Like, it's actually sexism and racism. So that framing for me is actually really helpful. And picking the people I want to work with. Like, I don't want to work with people where I have to pretend to be someone else and have to put on this armor to like show up really tough. Like, that's not who I want to be in the world. So finding people to collaborate with where I can say I don't know, and I can be vulnerable, and I can cry when someone shows me a picture of their dog. Like, that's what I want. So
I think that the thing I would add to that, I think there's the piece of imposter syndrome that I sense is like the intimidation, or I'm growing into somebody, like I'm growing into something else and I'm not quite there yet, and I'm still in that wobbly space, and I'm intimidated by the other people in the room. And in that case, I think acknowledging it, and, you know, Tara brought it up with us and told us she was intimidated. And then that gave us the space to say, well, we're pretty intimidated by you too. I mean, you're a big shot coming out of Mozilla, and like, we know nothing about DEI. So I mean, I think that acknowledging it and putting it out there is what helps me when I'm feeling it, but I feel it.
Thank you very much for sharing that.
Maybe one more question. Last.
Thanks, Michaela.
So maybe, Julie, it's time to move into closing.
Great.
Wrapping it up.
Well, not great. I mean, I wish we could hang out all day. So something that we do in our Openscapes champion calls is we do efficiency tips, which are most often short keyboard shortcuts or other efficiency tips just with your computer. And I won't demo one today since we're not screen sharing, but I will offer two, and hold up two fingers, two keyboard shortcuts that you can use on YouTube. So we'll be posting this video on YouTube, but also if you're interested in watching, obviously, anything else on YouTube, Dory Tunstall's talk at Mozilla or anything else. So these keyboard shortcuts are using the L key and the J key, which if your hand is on the keyboard, that's where your right pointer finger and ring finger are. And when a video is playing, the L key will jump ahead 10 seconds. So it's a way to hop forward 10 seconds. And then your J key will jump back 10 seconds. So if you're listening to something on YouTube and you didn't catch it and you want to catch it again, you can press JJ a couple times and hear it again. So those are 2 keyboard shortcuts that I use quite often. And
one thing
if you have, yep. Please.
Want to tie into that. So keyboard shortcuts is another part of the things that we do with our champions. And it gets a little bit to the imposter question. But there's this assumption that everybody knows what you know. And when Julie starts sharing keyboard shortcuts, like I was this many days old when I learned that J and L will move things forward and backwards. It's like, wow, that's really cool. And so it just raises that awareness of what are the things that I know that I could share that other people don't know. Julie.
Yeah. Thanks, Erin. That's great. Let's see, are there any, if anybody else wants to share a keyboard shortcut that they enjoy in the chat, we always love learning new ones. And otherwise, I think if there, Erin, do you have any final closing thoughts?
I don't. Well, I would say that I'm grateful to CSNS. We're grateful to CSNS for their support for us to work with Tara, and we are grateful to all of you for showing up and contributing to this space and to this conversation, and to Tara for being here and working with us.
Ooh, don't drop off yet. We have a call to action for you.
Yes.
Okay, give it.
Do you want to, you give it, Tara.
I was just trying to think, I was like, there's going to be lots of helpful, smart people who are going to come and they'll be like, I want to do a thing. So the thing that we would like you to do is tweet or share on social media one way that you're making science kinder science with the hashtag kinder science. So what's one behavior, one action, one thing that you're doing now or that you want to do to make this space kinder science?
Yeah. Well, so thank you, Tara, so much. And thanks all of you for being here. We are so grateful for you spending the time and hope we can continue these conversations and this work together as we go forward. We'll put a few links in the chat and we'll be posting this video on our YouTube channel, and we'll have a way from our website for you to navigate to it as well. So thank you so much and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks.